Hi, my name is Angel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be telling you guys about every single book that I DNF'd in 2024. I wanted to include this originally in my worst and most disappointing books of 2024 video, but I didn't want that one to be too long, so I figured why not just make a separate, hopefully short and sweet little video about all of my DNFs. Once again, if you do hear screaming in the background, there is a group of kids playing right behind the building right now. It's winter break. I just try to stay sane throughout it all. Without further ado, let's just go ahead and get right into it. My first DNF for 2024 was Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin. I DNF'd this at 8% of the way in, simply for no other reason than it was the first few days of the new year, and I could tell immediately that this is just not a book that I was going to really enjoy, just not the type of story that I want to read. Maybe if I got more into it, it could have gone a little bit better, but I don't think that I would have given this book more than like 3 stars, and I don't think I would have enjoyed the majority of it. Next is The Remaking by Clay McLeod Chapman, which I was really excited for because I've enjoyed 2 of this author's books before. I really loved Ghost Eaters. I also enjoyed Whisper Down the Lane, and then his other book, What Kind of Mother, I think was 3.5 stars for me, so not too bad. So I wanted to pick up this older title of his, and I was really excited for it because it sounded really interesting, but it just ended up not being anything that I really cared about. I just couldn't get into the story. I feel like the writing was very repetitive. There was a lot of repetition for like dramatic effect, but he just did it like too much to where it was just like mind-numbing repetition and just not an enjoyable experience. I DNF'd that one 62% of the way in, and then I ended up skimming to the very end and reading the last little bit to see how things wrapped up, and I don't think that the ending really made up for everything else that I endured through the 62% of the story. Next is Normal Women by Ainsley Hogarth, which I also DNF'd at 62% of the way through. This is another author that I've read from before, Mother Thing, and I did enjoy that. This one, I feel like it took way too long to get into the actual plot of the story. From the back of the book synopsis, we know this is about a woman who goes missing, but 200 something pages into the book and that hasn't happened. So the pacing was just very off, and the story itself I just wasn't intrigued in to begin with. The next book that I DNF'd was Shadows of Carcosa, which is a short story collection of cosmic horror from a lot of classic horror authors, Edgar Allan Poe, some other people that I can't think of right now. I DNF'd this one 14% of the way through. I read a couple of the stories. Some I enjoyed, some of them, most of them I didn't enjoy, and then I was also just not a really big fan of the writing style, and I just didn't feel the need to finish this one because I picked this up for my cosmic horror reading vlog, and the goal was just to read some short stories to kind of learn a little bit more about the subgenre, and I feel like I accomplished that with the few stories that I did read, and I just had no desire to pick this one back up. Next is The Handyman Method by Nick Cutter. I'm really sad because the synopsis of the book and then the way that I hear people talk about this book when they speak of it positively, it sounds exactly like something that I should enjoy. I see a lot of people that give it negative ratings for the misogynistic main character and the writing style, but I did not mind those when I was reading it. It was just simply I could not get into the story. I DNF'd this one 28% of the way through, and it was just, once again, it just wasn't gripping me. I wasn't pulled into the story at all, and I just couldn't make myself want to pick this up and read it any longer, and I'm really sad. Maybe one day I'll go back and try to reread this because hearing other people that love it talk about it, I feel like I should enjoy this book. But I also did look up spoilers, so maybe I'll have to wait a little bit before I go back and try to read it again. My next DNF was Hull 03 by Craig Bear. This I DNF'd at 45% of the way through. This is a sci-fi book. Is it like a sci-fi horror? I don't know, but I was really excited to read this one because it sounded really interesting, and to be quite honest, thinking back, I don't even remember what the plot was. The main issue that I had with this was the writing and the descriptiveness of it. I feel like I had a really hard time picturing the setting and picturing what the heck was going on in this book. It was just very confusing. I could not comprehend anything that was going on, and I just couldn't picture what the story was and where these characters were, and unfortunately I had to DNF it because of that. My next DNF was Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. This I got 29% of the way through, and this is a big book. I think it's over 600 pages, around the 700 page mark, something like that. So 30% of the way through is still a pretty good chunk, and I tried to give it as much time as I could, and I saw a lot of people online saying don't DNF it until, you know, read until this point and then it gets good. And I just feel like in my head, why should I have to read like 400 pages of a book just for it to get good when I didn't enjoy the entire 400 pages that I read up until that point? I just didn't see the point. I wish I could have enjoyed this one and been hooked in the story from the beginning, but I just wasn't really liking it, and I'm really sad to say that. My next DNF was a nonfiction book. This was Slow Productivity by Cal Newport, which is an author I've read from before. I DNF'd this one at 32% of the way in, simply because, not that there was anything wrong with the messaging or the writing, but I just don't feel like I was the target audience for this book. It just felt like it was geared a lot towards like people who run businesses and are involved in a lot of like a heavy workload and really trying to balance work-life productivity. A lot of people in creative fields, people that work from home, and that's just not me. And so I don't feel like I was really gaining anything from this book, and I don't feel like any of the things that the author was talking about were relevant to my life. The next one I DNF'd was Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. I DNF'd this at 41% of the way through. This is a follow-up to the book There, which I did read and did enjoy, and so I was excited to pick this one up. I will say Tommy Orange is a talented author. The writing was absolutely beautiful, but I just wasn't into the story, and I didn't really care about what was happening, and I was also kind of confused about what was happening. Maybe if I had reread There and then went right into this one, but it just didn't work out for me. My next one was The Book of Coley by M.R. Carey, which I DNF'd at 65% of the way in. This is an author that I loved before. This one, really, there was nothing wrong with this book. It was an intriguing premise. The writing was just fine. The characters were just fine, but unfortunately that's all it was. It was just fine, and it wasn't anything that like 65% of the way in, and I was like, I really don't understand why I'm reading this, because I have zero feelings towards it at all. Like, I'm just experiencing the story, but I'm not feeling anything towards it, and I don't really care about where it's going to go. This was also the first book in I think it was a trilogy or some sort of series, and so I just didn't feel the point of finishing it when I had literally zero feelings towards it. Next, I DNF'd The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters at 44% of the way through. This is once again a longer book. This one is a historical fiction, so I'm just not a really big fan of long historical fiction to begin with, so it's kind of a genre that I have to approach very carefully. I didn't really enjoy the story of this one, and I found it to be pretty boring for most of it, and that's why I DNF'd it. And I asked on Goodreads, I said, does this book get any better or any more interesting? Somebody told me no, it doesn't, so I said, okay, I'm gonna put it down. I'm gonna close the chapter on this one and not come back to it. Next, I DNF'd Just Another Missing Person by Jillian McAllister. I DNF'd this one 37% of the way through. This is a thriller that I don't really remember the plot of, but I just know that I, once again, wasn't getting hooked by the story. Didn't really care about what was going on, and I just didn't feel like continuing. Then I DNF'd Dear Aunt Annie by Erilyn Adams at 66% of the way through. I tried to read this one for a reading vlog. I believe it was when I was reading the least popular books on my TBR, so books that nobody really has read. This one had a lot of issues with the writing itself. It was just confusing and hard to read at times. The characters felt very flat, and I just feel like the story itself just wasn't very well thought out and very well executed. My next DNF was A Girl in Snow by Dania Kukafka, which I DNF'd at 55% of the way through. This is another author. She wrote Notes on an Execution, which was a 5-star read for me. This was like a thriller mystery, but I didn't really like any of the characters, and I didn't find the mystery to be very compelling. I found myself very bored throughout most of the book, and I ultimately, obviously, decided to just put it down. The next DNF that I had was The Coiled Serpent by Kamila Grudova. This is a short story collection that I got from NetGalley, and I got 23% of the way through before I put it down. really, I just didn't like the author's writing, and I didn't like the few stories that I did read of this collection. I felt like a lot of them were just gross for the sake of being gross, and there was really no plot or point or reason to any of them. At least the ones that I read. Obviously, I didn't read the entire collection. Short story collections to begin with are kind of finicky because there's going to be some that you absolutely love and some that you absolutely hate. But I just didn't like the writing style and a lot of the themes presented in this one, and that's why I quit pretty early on. Last but not least is a book that I actually DNF'd this month, which is The Trees by Ollie Shaw. I DNF'd this one 53% of the way through, and I was reading it because it was on my 20 books in 2024, and so I wanted to get to it before the end of the year. And I read, like I said, 53% of the book, and it got to the point where I just didn't feel like picking it up because it just felt like it was going nowhere. The book itself is nearly 500 pages, and so I feel like there were a lot of issues with the pacing because for what I read, I feel like nothing really was happening. Like it started off strong, and then we were just going through the motions with these characters and nothing was going on, and this book didn't need to be nearly 500 pages. I did look up spoilers to see what happens at the end, and I just don't feel like that's anything that I don't think my opinion would have been different had I read the entire book to the end. I don't think that the ending would have made up for what I was feeling. So I just put this one down. A little bit sad because I did want to read it in 2024, but I am glad that I didn't decide to purchase this book and then read it, because then I would be even more disappointed. So that is every book that I DNF'd in 2024. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully I will see you guys next time.